As soon as she finished the code, they would let her go quietly, and she had no idea it was coming. Logan's friend would slide into her position. She was just an old engineer stuck in the past. Helen Bristow froze in the hallway, hidden just out of view by the frosted glass wall outside the small third-floor conference room. She had only returned to retrieve the cardigan she'd left draped over her chair. It was after 8 in the evening, long past the hour when the office usually emptied. Most of the lights had dimmed into energy-saving mode, leaving scattered islands of fluorescent glow floating in the darkness. In the silence of the nearly abandoned floor, voices carried farther than they should have. Logan Pierce's voice drifted out first, light, amused, careless in the way people become when they believe no one important is listening. He spoke easily, like this was all obvious. "She's building the system we'll be using for years. Once it's done, we bring in Tyler. He already knows the basics. HR won't push back." Another voice responded, younger, uncertain. "Won't she make trouble?" Logan chuckled softly, the sound sharp enough to cut. "She won't even know what hit her. She's not the fighting type." They were talking about her, about Helen. She stood there, perfectly still, her pulse thudding so loudly she was certain it might give her away. The cardigan slipped entirely from her mind. When she finally stepped back, it was slow and controlled, her movements measured, her face calm. She didn't cry, she didn't gasp. She simply walked out into the cold night air, her thoughts already rearranging themselves with a clarity she hadn't felt in years. Helen had spent 19 years at Braverton Technologies. She had outlasted 3 executive shakeups, 2 near collapses that almost sent the company under, and more restructurings than she could count. She was the architect behind the code that still powered their core logistics platform, code so deeply woven into the company's operations that most people treated it like infrastructure rather than invention. No one else truly understood it because no one else had lived inside it the way she had. It was deliberate, clean, disciplined, with invisible safeguards built quietly into every function. She had seen change before, she had adapted to it, guided it, survived it, but she had never seen it this openly predatory. Logan's arrival had shifted something fundamental. He was young, polished, endlessly friendly, always smiling, always asking questions. At first, Helen had assumed curiosity. Legacy systems didn't usually fascinate people raised on glossy interfaces and rapid frameworks. But his questions had been wrong in a way she couldn't quite name at the time. He didn't ask why the system worked, only how it was stitched together. He wanted to know who had access, where backups lived, how dependencies were chained. Now she understood exactly why. He wasn't learning, he was preparing. That night, Helen backed up everything. Every script, every subroutine, every annotation she had written over the last 5 years. She encrypted the files and stored them where only she could reach them. She printed records, made handwritten notes, traced timelines. She didn't yet know what she would need, only that she would need something. If Logan believed she was slow or naive, he had misjudged her badly. Helen was not just a programmer. She was someone who had spent her entire career being underestimated and learned how to survive because of it. The next morning, she sat at her desk with a fresh notebook open beside her keyboard, reviving a habit she hadn't relied on in years. On the first page, she wrote the date. No title, no commentary, just a record. She would document everything, not only for herself, but for whatever future was quietly being reshaped without her consent. Looking back, the warning signs had been there for months. Logan's interest in the codebase had never been casual. He had been placed as office manager by the new CEO, yet his attention lingered obsessively on systems that predated his authority. He asked questions meant for replication, not comprehension. He hovered longer than necessary, smiling as he asked what certain blocks did, whether things could be streamlined with machine learning, whether documentation existed for areas she had deliberately kept lean. Without fully realizing it, Helen had already begun to protect herself. She stored her work differently. She layered in custom encryption and subtle obfuscation, not to hide anything from the company, but to slow anyone who tried to pull it apart without understanding its logic. At the time, it had felt cautious. Now it felt prescient. Logan hadn't stopped at observation. He had taken her early proposal, a modest restructuring meant to improve internal resource tracking, and repackaged it. He renamed it, dressed it up with timelines and projections, and presented it to the board as a bold new initiative. He spoke with confidence about a system he had never built, supported by slides polished enough to distract from their emptiness. His mistake wasn't taking credit. His mistake was assuming she wouldn't recognize her own work. In the weeks that followed, Helen behaved as if nothing had changed. She attended meetings, she nodded, she delivered clean updates and cooperated fully with audits. Behind the scenes, she worked with surgical intent. Every completed module was mirrored, archived, anonymized. She adjusted timestamps, she embedded silent triggers that changed nothing operationally, but alerted her if the code was moved, copied, or recompiled without her involvement. She also began watching, not obsessively but carefully, who Logan spoke to, when he printed documents, when he met with Tyler, the man quietly positioned as her replacement. Tyler's background was marketing, not engineering. His presence only made sense if the goal wasn't competence, but compliance. Helen spoke to others, too, quietly. Lunch with Beth in compliance, casual questions for Alan in IT security. She never accused, she simply asked enough to make people think. Then she saw it. A server log, an access query that felt wrong. One of her older test scripts had been run on a company testing environment. The user ID wasn't hers. It was Logan's. She closed her laptop and stared out the window. Rain streaking the glass. Understanding settling in with brutal clarity. They weren't planning to fire her. They were already stripping her work from her. The carelessness came next. Logan and Tyler talked openly in the break room early one morning, feet up, voices loud, as if experience itself had stopped existing. "Legacy code isn't magic," Tyler said confidently. "It's redundant, bloated. I could streamline it in a week." Helen listened from behind a half-open utility door, breathing slowly. That was the story they would tell. Not just that she was expendable, but that she had been holding the company back. Tyler would be framed as the rescuer. It was a script she'd seen before, used on people quieter than her. That was the day she stopped preserving what existed and began rebuilding it. She rewrote the system carefully, deliberately. Straightforward logic became layered, elegant, interdependent. The system still worked perfectly, but only if you understood how it had been constructed. The surface remained familiar. Beneath it, everything had changed. At night, she stayed late under the excuse of deployment prep. She gathered logs, access trails, email chains. She scanned old notebooks and preserved drafts with intact timestamps. She created physical copies and digital redundancies. One set went into a sealed envelope in a safety deposit box. Others were sent encrypted to a trusted former colleague now working for a government agency. No explanation, just insurance. She didn't sleep well. Pretending drained her more than the work itself. Smiling at Logan, coaching Tyler, enduring their confidence. But she endured it. Then, one Friday morning, it ended. A pale blue envelope sat neatly at the center of her keyboard. Inside, a single paragraph. Effective immediately, her position had been made redundant due to restructuring. No meeting, no escort, just erasure. Around noon, Logan passed her desk. "Rough morning," he said lightly. "Let me know if you need help packing." She looked up at him and smiled, small, cold, controlled. "I already have everything I need." He didn't ask what she meant. Helen's desk was cleared by noon. No farewell, no speech, no HR representative walking her out. She took her time, folding a sweater, unplugging her charger, slipping a photo of her niece into her bag. Her computer was still on when she left. No one had asked for her password. No one thought they would need it. By 1 p.m., Tyler was sitting at her desk. He wore a new navy blazer, a fresh haircut, and a grin far too wide for someone who had never contributed a single line of production-ready code in his life. Within the hour, Tyler sent a team-wide email enthusiastic about leading the next phase of Aegis, eager to refine Helen's foundational work and introduce new efficiencies. First presentation with external partners scheduled for next week. Let's build something bold. Helen read it from her personal inbox at home. She sipped her tea slowly and let out a small, soundless laugh. "Bold," she repeated softly, then closed the message. She hadn't sabotaged anything. She wasn't that kind of person. The system worked. It had passed all internal testing and had been quietly running on a shadow server for 2 weeks before she left. But it was dense, oblique. It relied on self-referencing logic modules that rewrote their own execution paths based on external triggers. Even a skilled engineer would need weeks to fully grasp it. Tyler had no chance. By Tuesday, the first fractures appeared. At 8:14 a.m., Helen received a call from an unknown number. She ignored it. At 8:31, an email arrived from Logan Pierce. Subject: quick question. "Hey Helen, hope you're well. Wondering if you might clarify a couple of minor points about the data harmonization layer in the new build. Just a quick chat would really help the team. Let me know if you're available sometime today." She didn't respond. She didn't need to, because by 10 o'clock, Braverton was hosting a virtual meeting with a major logistics partner, one that depended on the new platform to track freight consolidation across multiple vendors. It was meant to be a breakthrough. Unified architecture, real-time syncing, predictive analytics, all built on the engine Helen had finalized days earlier. The call began smoothly. Tyler introduced himself with confidence. "We're excited to show you what we've developed in-house," he said, his tone pure TED Talk. "Our new system will allow you to reduce operational drag by at least 17% based on internal projections." He shared his screen, clicked into the interface, and then silence. The page flickered. The graphs were empty. The demo environment stalled during initialization. Tyler's cursor hovered, hesitated, then moved again, opening a diagnostics window he didn't understand. "Are we still connected?" one of the external reps asked. "Yes," Tyler replied quickly. "Just a moment. Might be some local caching." Behind the scenes, the platform had failed to execute its pre-processing module. The harmonization layer hadn't loaded because it relied on a silent validation process requiring an external key Helen had rotated and anonymized. Nothing was broken. It was simply inaccessible unless you knew how to unlock it. At 10:22 a.m., Helen's phone rang again, the same number. This time she answered and set the receiver on the table without speaking. "I'm telling you, we need her help for just an hour," Logan's voice hissed. "We can offer a consulting fee, whatever she wants. She doesn't even need to come in." A pause, another voice in the background. "Tyler, she made this happen. I know she did. This wasn't happening last week." Helen ended the call. At 11:40, a text arrived from an old colleague, Beth from accounting. "Heard about the demo. Total train wreck. Tyler looked like a ghost. Are you okay? Miss you around here." Helen didn't answer immediately. She stepped onto her balcony, pulled her cardigan tight against the breeze, and looked down at the street below. Braverton had played its hand. Now it was her move. The offer came from a firm called Nolan Gay Systems, a mid-size consultancy known for rebuilding broken corporate IT infrastructures. Helen hadn't applied. A former colleague, now a senior analyst there, had quietly tipped them off after hearing about the collapse at Braverton. "Would you consider a conversation?" the email asked. "No pressure, no politics, just coffee and curiosity." Helen didn't hesitate. She arrived wearing a neutral blouse, carrying a zippered leather folder, and projecting the calm of someone who had already faced the worst and walked through it unshaken. They talked for 2 hours. What began as a routine technical interview shifted into something else entirely. When she produced a trimmed version of her Aegis core documentation and explained the system's silent recalibration cycles, the energy in the room changed. "You wrote this?" asked the lead architect, a gay-haired man named Brent who had spent 25 years in database engineering. "Every line," Helen said. "He studied the folder like a rare manuscript. I've only seen one other engineer design logic like this, and he's retired." By the end of the week, they extended a quiet offer: full autonomy over system design, no management duties unless she wanted them, and a salary higher than she'd ever earned at Braverton. She accepted with the same steady tone she used when switching off the lights at night. At the same time, things were unraveling for Logan. On the morning of his next investor prep call, an email arrived from Internal Systems Compliance. One of the firm's mirrored environments had crashed due to missing dependencies. Tyler had attempted a full overwrite, an unauthorized one. At first, Logan brushed it off as a permissions issue until the infrastructure team called. Tyler deleted the test archive, the engineer said flatly. He thought he was clearing cache files and wiped the dependency chains. The restore point is corrupted. Everything connected to Helen's sandbox is gone. Logan's chest tightened. Define gone, the engineer hesitated. That archive was tied to the core deployment folder. The file signatures are unrecoverable. The scripts, the analytics engine, the transaction mirror, gone. Logan went pale. Do we have backups? Silence. No, the engineer finally said. That was the backup. The estimate arrived later that afternoon. Development costs of the deleted assets, including testing hours, proprietary logic, and lost deployment time, $13.2 million. Logan slammed the conference room door so hard the frame cracked. Desperate, he summoned Tyler. You told me you understood it. I did, Tyler said, shaken. It's just her version had all these hidden modules. I thought they were obsolete. You deleted the core. It was running on junk architecture. Logan paced, fingers buried in his hair. My dad expects a working product this quarter. You just erased it. Tyler opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Across town, Helen sat in a quiet conference room with her new team, walking them through a real-time analytics dashboard that automatically adjusted to bandwidth limits. She passed around printouts, each page clearly stamped with her name, the creation date, and her personal copyright. Brent smiled across the table. I don't think Braverton knew what they had. Helen sipped her coffee, her expression calm. They didn't, she said, but they will. The first person to leave Braverton wasn't high profile. It was Megan from Infrastructure, a quiet woman who rarely spoke in meetings, but had kept the network stable for 5 years. She resigned by email, declined the farewell cake, and simply left. A week later, IT security lost 2 senior engineers, both citing directional misalignment in their exit interviews. In truth, they were exhausted by the chaos, the incompetence, the slow decay of good work under bad leadership. And then the whispers began. Did you hear Helen's over at Nolan Gay? Now she's already leading a new system design team. They're building around the architecture Braverton threw away. The whispers didn't stay whispers for long. In tech circles, news moved fast. Everyone remembered the disastrous product demo. Everyone had seen Logan's strange smile in the follow-up video, trying to explain away the temporary technical complications. It didn't take long for people to connect the dots. Helen was the architect. Tyler was the error. Logan was the one who allowed it to happen. At Nolan Gray, Helen stayed silent about Braverton. She refused to criticize her former employer, no matter how often reporters or recruiters tried to draw her out. That silence only deepened their respect. Instead of talking, she showed her system, a stripped-down, adaptive logistics platform, began outperforming projections by 20% in its very first rollout phase. Internally, they called it Helen Line. The CEO joked about watermarking her name directly into the code. Back at Braverton, Logan sat through yet another exit interview, this time with Brandon from Product. Brandon had been one of the last voices defending Logan's decisions, but not anymore. This place is bleeding talent, Brandon said bluntly, and you're still pretending Tyler can fix it. Logan rubbed his forehead. We've made some missteps, I won't deny that. It's not missteps, Brandon cut in. It's ego. You fired the one person holding the system together, and now she's taking your best people. Logan snapped that she wasn't taking anyone, that they were just opportunists. No, Brandon replied evenly, they're just not stupid. When he left, he carried a Nolan Gray Systems tote bag under his arm. By the end of the month, 8 employees had resigned. 4 were already hired by Nolan Gray. 1 even asked Helen directly during onboarding, "Did you plan all this?" Helen only smiled faintly. "No, but I'm not surprised." Logan, meanwhile, was unraveling. The executive board began asking harder questions. Why was the company hemorrhaging talent? Why had the Aegis project been marked inactive in the last quarterly report? Why was there no documentation justifying the firing of its lead developer?
Logan tried to redirect blame, citing inefficiency, resistance to change, and lack of cross-training, but none of it held anymore. Worse still, quiet discussions of potential legal action began circulating, not from Helen, but from a logistics client claiming the failed deployment had cost them significant revenue.
Due diligence became the phrase appearing in internal memos. Auditors were discreetly requested, and through it all, Helen kept working. At Nolan Gay, she reviewed code with interns, led architectural planning sessions, and continued building. Her systems were clean, her leadership steady. Her past required no defense. It was already proving itself. CEO Russell Forrester was not a man who needed to raise his voice. A single raised eyebrow could silence a room. But when he entered the Monday morning executive session, the tension was so thick it felt audible. He dropped a folder onto the glass conference table with a dull thud. "Would someone like to explain," he said slowly, "how we lost a $13 million code base and half our mid-tier engineering staff in under 2 fiscal quarters?" No one moved. Logan sat with his hands folded neatly, sweat glistening at his temple. He tried to speak, but his mouth was dry. Russell didn't wait. "Let's walk through this." He opened the folder. The system, branded as Aegis, pitched to partners, integrated into our roadmap, and highlighted in last quarter's earnings call, is now non-functional. Correct? A low murmur followed. The lead engineer behind it was Helen Bristow, a veteran employee with an impeccable record. Correct? Logan cleared his throat. Yes. But Russell raised a hand. She was terminated without formal review or documented performance concerns. No complaints on file, no HR intervention. In fact, he said, turning a page, the only record tied to her departure is a vague note referencing team restructuring. Silence followed as Russell leaned forward. "So, I'll ask again, how does someone like her get replaced by someone like Tyler, who, according to this internal audit, erased our only functioning environment by running a purge script on what he believed was junk code?" Someone coughed at the far end of the table. Logan's face reddened. "I made a judgment call," Logan said, forcing his voice steady. "Helen was difficult to collaborate with, resistant to modernization. She wouldn't document her processes. We needed someone agile, adaptable," Russell echoed. "Your replacement choice wiped out years of development, and now Nolan Gray Systems is winning contracts we were positioned for, using her work. She took the system with her." "No," Russell snapped. "She didn't. She wrote the system and documented it under her name, which you failed to secure as company intellectual property before terminating her." Logan leaned back, stunned. He hadn't realized how much Russell already knew. "Here's what I believe," Russell continued quietly. "You underestimated her. You thought she was outdated, silent, easy to remove, but she was the only thing keeping your department stable." He stood, buttoned his jacket, "and you fired her to give your friend a job." The words lingered like smoke. Russell turned to the room. "I want a full investigation. Every approval, every meeting note, every security audit. I want to know who knew what and when. I want options, legal, operational, reputational. We will not let this sink the company." Logan slumped in his chair. For the first time since orchestrating Helen's dismissal, he looked small. Meanwhile, at Nolan Gay, Helen was finishing a strategy meeting. Her team had just secured a new client, ironically one Braverton lost after the Aegis collapse. After the call, Brent approached her. "Rumor is," he said casually, "Braverton's CEO is digging through the ashes." Helen didn't flinch. "He'll find answers." Brent raised an eyebrow. "Thinking of going public?" Helen shook her head. "No need." "Could be satisfying." She met his gaze, calm. "I'm not interested in revenge. I'm interested in never being underestimated again." Brent nodded slowly. "You've made your point.
No headlines, no lawsuits, just a quiet reckoning and the slow, inevitable collapse of the house that fired the woman holding up its walls. The first time Logan showed up at Nolan Gay's lobby, he wasn't even listed as a visitor. The receptionist looked blankly. "Do you have an appointment?" Logan glanced at his phone, voice dropping. "Could you just tell Helen Bristow that Logan Pierce is here?" She typed briefly. "I'm sorry, Miss Bristow is in a closed planning session this morning. It's urgent," he whispered. "She'll want to hear this." But Helen didn't come down. She was on the second floor, seated at the head of a table discussing rollout schedules and error tolerance thresholds. Someone mentioned a man named Logan downstairs. "Ignore it," she said, without looking up. He returned the next day and the day after that. By the fourth visit, security alerted upper management. Brent intercepted him personally. "You're causing a disruption," he said calmly. "I just need 5 minutes." "Why?" Brent asked. Logan hesitated. "Because I made a mistake." That afternoon, Helen received a formal request through her assistant. Logan Pierce had scheduled a meeting. She raised an eyebrow. "Schedule it," she said. 10 minutes on site. I want it visible." The meeting was set for Friday at 4 p.m. At 3:09 p.m., Logan entered the room looking nothing like the confident manager he once was. His blazer was wrinkled, his hair disordered. He looked more like a man leaving an emergency room than a boardroom. Helen was already seated, reviewing system audit results. Logan closed the door. "Thank you for seeing me." She didn't look up. 10 minutes. He shifted his weight like a chastened schoolboy. "We've lost 2 more clients. Tyler's gone. Legal has opened a full inquiry, and he faltered. "I'm responsible. I should have recognized your value. I didn't, and I've paid for it every day since." Helen finally looked at him. "We need you back," he said, voice breaking. "You're the only one who can salvage what's left. Name your role, your salary. I'll leave if you want. I'll tell my father. Just help us." And then, to the stunned glance of someone passing the glass wall, Logan dropped to his knees. "I'm begging you." Helen let the silence stretch. Then she spoke. "I built that system to support an entire company. You tried to hand it to someone who doesn't know the difference between a logic gate and a dead end." He nodded, eyes lowered. "You thought you were replacing a function," she said. "But I wasn't a function. I was the foundation." He swallowed. "You didn't fire me," Helen said calmly. "You fired your company's future."